Okay, so we're going to listen to this stuff on Common Sense Central called Rebutting a Murderer. I'm going to go through each episode and I'm going to rebutting a murderer. So, here we go.
Here they come. Up the road. After 18 years.
Making a Murderer is a national obsession, a riveting, visually stunning masterpiece of documentary filmmaking. But it's also one of the more slanted, one-sided pieces of storytelling in recent memory, establishing its narrative that an innocent man was twice framed within the very first 2 minutes of the series.
We knew he was innocent. We knew he was innocent.
Law enforcement despised Stephen Avery. Stephen Avery was a shining example of their inadequacies, their misconduct.
It was like the same old Steve was back. He was happy, he was smiling. I did tell him, be careful. There was just something I felt. I said, Manitowoc County's not done with you. They are not even close to being finished with you.
Those first 3 sound bites before the opening theme song is even played set the tone of the first episode, which focuses on Avery being freed after 18 years of incarceration for a 1985 rape that DNA evidence subsequently proved he did not commit. The audience hears portions of interviews with Stephen Avery, his mother, his father, his cousin, his public defender, his post-conviction lawyer, his civil rights lawyer, and upwards of a dozen more people who would be expected to stand up for him and portray him as a sympathetic figure. In fact, of all the people interviewed in episode 1, only 2, former Manitowoc County Circuit Court Judge Fred Hazelwood and Milwaukee Journal Sentinel reporter Tom Kircher, could possibly be considered unbiased. Literally everyone else has a vested interest in introducing Avery as a good man targeted by a bad criminal justice system.
Okay, I'm going to just pause that right there. Why is that? Every person that was involved in this whole thing was invited to participate and declined. Some people, multiple times, were invited to participate. They were asked to give their side, to input whatever information they wanted. And I also want to just very strongly point out, it's not like this is a movie, like Ken Kratz keeps calling it a movie. A movie is scripted. A movie has somebody directing it and telling people what to do. This is all footage. This stuff happened. It's not made up, and even though it might just be telling the story from one side, what side were you listening to when you were watching the news? Ken Kratz. That's who. Just saying. That was extremely one-sided. And in my opinion, it's the reason why they were convicted in the first place, because of that ridiculous story. So dramatic about this terrible, terrible thing that Brendan had to get off his chest, and he just came and confessed, and it's ridiculous. It didn't happen. Watch every single one of Brendan's interrogation videos and the audio clips all the way from the beginning, and you will see that every single piece of evidence that they found was planted like a little seed in Brendan's head. Why do you think that is? Because they didn't have crap. They had circumstantial case. That's why. Anyway, I'm going to let this guy keep talking, and I'm going to keep, rebutting.
Only Stephen Avery wasn't a good man.
Another mistake I did. I had a bunch of friends over who were fooling around with the cat. And I don't know, they were kind of negative on it. I tossed him over the fire, and he lit up to me. It was defend the cat.
The series glosses over that incident and allows Avery to dismiss it as simply an accident while a bunch of kids goofed around. In reality, it was a brutal act of violence. Avery did not, as he claimed, simply throw the cat through a bonfire. He doused it in oil and gasoline and put it in the fire in an apparent attempt at watching it suffer a horrific death. Psychiatrists warn that such acts of violence against animals are often precursors to later acts of violence toward people, and a number of scientific studies back this up. In other words, an act such as Avery's could have in fact been the very first makings of a murderer. But making a murderer refuses to explore this.
Pausing again. First of all, repeated acts of violence and torture to animals could be a sign of a future serial killer. It could be a sign of someone with a really screwed up head. We're not talking about 22 or whatever he was, year old guy hanging out having some beers by the bonfire with his friends, and his friends, they're all drunk, acting silly. He admitted that this was a mistake, okay? There's no reason to go into it deeper or further because there is no more to it. He's not a serial killer. He's not a rapist. He has not been convicted and successfully charged with rape. I mean, he was, but you know, obviously he was exonerated. So he's not a violent criminal. He's not violent towards people. He committed some burglaries, and I'm sure we'll get into the other thing with his cousin, but with the cat, it was a horrible thing. He admitted it. He did it. He's not denying that he did it. He never denied that he did it. It was a mistake. It was a one-time mistake, not a repeat pattern that you might see in a future serial killer. So there was no reason to make a big deal out of it.
I was young and stupid and hang around with the wrong people.
Stevie did do a lot of stupid things, but he always owned up to everything he did wrong.
Actually, he didn't. He tried to explain his animal cruelty away, as he did with 2 burglary convictions, and the series lets him get away with it, presenting only his own family members and attorneys to give any of the incidents any context which, unsurprisingly, is sympathetic, understanding, and dismissive. Moreover, the series glosses over Avery's increasingly sexually aggressive and violent behavior towards women. In January of 1985, his cousin accused him of masturbating in front of her as she drove by.
I didn't put it in that many words. He didn't masturbate on the hood of my car, but he did come out in front of my car and he was doing his thing.
This is why you're driving 40 miles an hour by his house?
He did run out towards the road. He was prepared. He had it all ready.
When she told others about this at a local bar, Avery became enraged and chased her down, running her car off the road with his car, then getting out and pointing a gun at her head.
In 1985, do you remember the morning in January when you were forced off the road by Stephen?
Yes.
Only Sandra Morris, the victim, isn't allowed to explain what happened to her. Instead, the series once again allows Avery to explain away a violent incident.
Moved alongside of her. Never can. Swinging a little skid. Did she ever go down into the ditch? No. Okay, once she stopped her car, what was the next thing you did? I got out. I grabbed the gun. She asked me what I was doing. Was your gun loaded? No. Empty.
The series implies...
Okay, I'm just going to pause it. I'm not sure if you could hear that part, but that's Stephen being questioned about that incident with his cousin. He is explaining that she was spreading rumors that this never happened, that he was not having sex with his wife out in the front yard, and he did not masturbate on her car, but she's going around telling people at bars, okay? this is a really credible lady, by the way, chilling in bars all the time, right? But she's telling people, obviously, making him look bad. It's pretty understandable that he'd be pissed. I'd be pissed. Because a small town, you don't want rumors like that spread around you, about you. And what he did obviously was wrong, but he wasn't trying to rape her. It's his cousin. Ew. He was trying to scare her into leaving him alone, you know? And it was stupid, obviously. He never said that it was right, all right? He admitted that he did it. He was telling the officers what happened. And he did not lie to them. He didn't deny it. He admitted it, okay? That's important to remember. All the things that he's done, the burglaries and whatever, a burglary, I don't know how many there were, he admitted, all right? The rape of Penny Bernstein, denied, because he was innocent. Same with the murder of Teresa Halbach. Innocent, he has denied it. He has never changed his story. This it should tell you something. But anyway, I'm going to let the guy keep running his mouth.
That Avery was somehow the victim here, that because Morris had been telling people about an incident in which her cousin sexually harassed her, he was somehow justified in slamming his car into hers and then threatening her with his gun. More troublingly, the series also suggests that the only reason this incident is ever prosecuted is because Morris was married to a part-time Manitowoc County Sheriff's deputy, as if running someone off the road and then threatening them with a handgun would and should normally be ignored. And who's making this allegation? Why, Avery's attorney, of course.
Stephen's actions didn't get what he was hoping. Sandy Morris happened to be married to a Manitowoc County Sheriff's deputy, and she immediately went to the Sheriff's Department and filed a complaint that minimized her involvement in provoking the incident and maximized the alleged danger.
Later in 1985, of course, Avery is charged with raping Penny Bernstein as Bernstein jogs along a beach in Manitowoc.
All right, hold on. Before he goes on about that, his attorney said that Stephen minimized his attorney said that she minimized her involvement and maximized his and the danger. And the only reason why this didn't work out for Stephen to scare her in this way is because of who she was married to. Now, I don't necessarily agree with that. I mean, if she was just some random person, I'm sure that the same sort of thing would have happened. But I think because what she was trying to say, I think that because she was a cousin, he might not have expected that she would go to the police and report it. She would understand, maybe I should back off. You know, I should probably stop running my mouth. I mean, right? I think that's all he wanted. I don't believe that he would have hurt her, obviously. And I don't believe that he believed she would report it. I think that I know he expected that it would just scare her and make her back off and stop spreading rumors. That's all. Again, not really minimized, just family drama.
County. Making a Murderer alleges that the only reason Avery was ever a suspect in the first place was because of Sandra Morris's prior allegation that her friend, a Manitowoc Sheriff's deputy, fingered Avery in spite of what Penny Bernstein was telling investigators. The show, however, doesn't focus at all on the fact that Avery and Bernstein's actual rapist, Gregory Allen, bore a striking resemblance to each other. So when Bernstein was describing her attacker, a man with shaggy blonde hair and a beard, she was describing a man with whom investigators were already very familiar. A man who had sexually harassed his cousin and then violently threatened her when she dared talk about it earlier that year. A man who had brutally killed his family's cat, and a man who had been convicted of 2 burglaries, all within the past few years.
Pausing. Okay, first of all, Penny did not describe Stephen Avery. She described Gregory Allen. Her attacker did not have blonde hair. He had brown hair. Her attacker did not have blue, very, very blue eyes like Stephen did. He had brown eyes. Her attacker was not 5'6", like Steven. He was taller. I don't remember how tall she said he was, but taller than Steven. Steven is obviously short. I'm taller than he is. It's a very big difference, you know. But when you compare the two facial features of them side by side, their hair maybe, they did look similar. They had a similar face. But when you go into what the sketch artist drew, it was obviously, very obviously, the mugshot of Stephen Avery. He's not just the pencil, as he claimed he was. He drew that mugshot, period. That's it. And then he framed it. I mean, I know he talks about how it was his first sketch that he had done, and that it was involved in a conviction and blah blah blah. And, you know, sure, it's a nice little souvenir or whatever to keep on your wall, but even when he was questioned in the civil suit, in his deposition, he admitted and said that it looks like Stephen Avery. And I love how the attorneys answered, yes, you're right, it does. Because it did. Anyway.
Stephen Avery fit the description that the victim provided, and he had been growing increasingly sexually violent. It was entirely logical for law enforcement to suspect him of this crime, which took place near his home. Avery did have a very good alibi, but the series makes it seem as though it was unreasonable for investigators not to believe the family members who said they were with him for the entire day that Bernstein was raped. In yet another example of making a murderer minimizing or ignoring anything that would make Avery or his family look at all unsympathetic, the series doesn't explain that Avery's brothers, Charles and Earl, were also very well known to law enforcement, which would have had reason not to trust them. 3 years after Stephen was convicted of the rape, Charles was charged with sexual assault.
Okay, I'm going to pause this guy because, first of all, just because a family has several members who have been in trouble with the law for specific things does not mean that they have committed every single similar crime that they're accused of. Okay? Do a proper investigation and rule them out like you're supposed to. You don't just assume, well, he was starting to get violent, sexually violent, and that should mean that probably did this. You know, Penny also says that, you know, at some point early in the investigation at the hospital or whatever it was, that she was told, yeah, that sounds like Stephen Avery, by the description. And of course that was put in her head, and she is the only person that has come forward to Stephen and apologized for wrongfully convicting him of this, for wrongfully pointing at him and saying, yeah, that's the guy. Of course she pointed him out. She had a picture of his face, a perfect mugshot picture drawn of his face in a lineup of photos. She picked the exact picture that the sketch artist drew. Obviously, Greg Allen is not in that lineup. So what is she gonna do? I mean, that's the best she could do, and nobody blames her for that. She was just as screwed over by the police as Stephen was. But, you know, my point was, just because he had done things in the past does not mean that he did this. We're talking about a rape. He had never raped anyone before, so why would you just assume that he's raped someone? because there's criminal past. That does not include rape, so explain that. That makes no sense. Anyway.
Acquitted. In 1999, his former wife accused him of sexually assaulting her and wrapping a telephone cord around her neck. A deferred prosecution saved him from serving prison time. In 1992, Earl pleaded no contest to battery and fourth-degree sexual assault after attacking his wife. Do these sound like entirely credible witnesses, or would it have been logical for investigators to believe that they were lying to protect their brother? And their brother, Stephen Avery himself, apparently didn't think too much of them either.
Okay, I'm going to pause. Just because you beat the shit out of your wife, I mean, that's a terrible thing, obviously. But that does not mean that every word that comes out your mouth is a lie. My ex-husband was abusive towards me, and he did actually know how to tell the truth sometimes, believe it or not. Not as often as I had liked, but he did. He told the truth sometimes. It happens. Just because you're related does not mean that you're going to lie. Now, we're talking about, 16 witnesses? Not including all family. The biggest was at the hardware store when Stephen and his wife and their twins and their other kids were in the hardware store. The cashier remembers seeing them because twins, oh my god, twin babies, they're like 2 weeks old. Yeah, that's something you would remember, okay? This lady didn't know them. She is not family. She doesn't know them. She's way the fuck up in Green Bay or whatever, 45 minutes away or something. Tell me why she lied, okay? You talked about in the beginning unbiased witnesses. What about that? She is the most credible, unbiased witness, and she alibis them. Explain it.
In an appellate filing in 2009, he suggested that either Charles or Earl might have actually killed Teresa Halbach, not him. Bernstein was also able to pick Stephen Avery out of a lineup. His face looked a great deal like Allen's, and Bernstein was obviously panicked and under a tremendous amount of stress as she was being raped, potentially making it very difficult to remember precise details of either her attack or her attacker. This is a very common phenomenon, especially in sexual assault cases, which is why forensic evidence is now so important in securing convictions. In 1985, though, such evidence, such as DNA testing, simply was not available. Hence, the case against Avery hinged not on Manitowoc County Sheriff's deputies' wrongdoing, but almost entirely on Bernstein's identification of him as her attacker. An identification that turned out to be incorrect.
They got a full profile. That profile conclusively excluded Stephen Avery. It could not have come from him. Now we know that with certainty.
While Avery was in prison, the series also glossed over his continued violent and threatening behavior, again allowing him to explain it away.
I wrote some bad letters. It lasted about 3 years. And then I told him to go for the divorce.
In one letter, he wrote, "I hate you. You got your divorce, now you will pay for it." In another, he wrote, "If you don't bring up my kids, I will kill you. I promise. Ha ha." Again, a pattern of threatening behavior toward women emerges, but Making a Murderer refuses to show how it may have made Avery into a murderer. His fellow inmates said he talked openly about wanting to rape, torture, and kill women, and said he drew diagrams of a torture chamber that he planned to build once he was released.
Okay, we're going to pause there. This video is almost over, by the way. We're talking about a convicted person sitting in prison who, I'm sorry, is less credible than an unbiased eyewitness, the cashier at the hardware store, that will likely, possibly, I'm not going to accuse them of anything, but possibly say whatever it might take to get themselves a sweet little deal so they can get a little time off their sentence, maybe get some privileges, whatever. Okay? I'm not going to say that it didn't happen. Stephen could have been just talking shit. Who knows? But he obviously did not do that. He had no torture chamber. He had no whatever. And he absolutely did not, you know, go out raping people. He had a fiance who, from what I understand, shortly after he was released from prison, he met her, and they were together the whole time that he was free. So, you know, I don't think that his plans of a torture chamber and all that stuff is really something that he was going to do. Now, I'm sure later we'll get into the handcuffs and things. Those are sex toys. They're not torture devices. So what? But anyway, listen to the very rest of this video and see.
He also reportedly said that he knew how to get rid of a body by burning it in a fire pit.
Okay, that's the end of the video. So, when did this person claim this? After this shit was all over the news? Is that surprising? That's where the prosecution, that's where the state claimed that Teresa was burned in his fire pit, in his burn pit in the backyard. That's obviously bullshit. She was moved. She was burned somewhere else and moved and dumped there. Period. Look at the evidence, because it makes zero sense that she would be burned in his burn pit, and then he would take, I don't know, a couple handfuls of bones and go throw them over here, and, you know, his sister's burn barrel, and then takes them over to the quarry, quarter mile or so away, dump them out there. That's the stupidest shit I've ever heard. I'm sorry, but that makes no sense. It's obvious that they were moved from somewhere else, possibly to the burn pit. I'm sorry, possibly to the quarry, with the burn barrel dumped out in his burn pit. I'm sure whoever did that did not realize that they were leaving bones behind at the quarry or in the burn barrel. They were just mixed up and stuck in all that crap in the bottom. So, you know, anyway, that is episode 1. I'm going to do this with all of them, because this whole thing, as we go, just, they get worse and worse. And the accusations that this guy, he sounds very credible. He sounds pretty reasonable. He just sounds like he is saying it very nicely, so it would be believable. He is biased and one-sided. His story is biased and one-sided. He is telling a story, just like Kratz did. The documentary did not tell a story. Documentary showed footage. That's the difference. Anyway, sorry the video is so long. Hopefully, try to cut it down, but I like to talk a lot, especially when I hear a bunch of ridiculousness. So, thanks.